So we finished discussing some topics relating to American history, and now I'd like to go to a realm that's more fundamental. I'd like to read from the Psalms, the second of the books of wisdom in the Old Testament. So this is from the beginning, starting with Book 1, and again this is the Psalms. The way of the righteous and the wicked. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on this law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruits in the season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. Okay, so let's pick this apart here. It begins, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. And the wicked, we could say, are those that do not follow the path of the Lord. And this path is a path of truth. It is of faith that there is a transcendent truth to be had, nor stands in the way of sinners. That is, in the way that sinners stand, the blessed does not stand in that same manner. Nor sits in the seat of scoffers, those that mock religion or moral virtue. The blessed does not sit in that seat. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on this law he meditates day and night. So his delight is in the law that mediates day and night. So it's this differentiation that the law of the Lord provides between the light and the darkness, what is true and what is false, or what is right and what is wrong. And for this person, he must delight in that law, the blessed man. And so this next passage here, he is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruits in its season, and its leaf does not wither. And so what might this mean? So if a tree is to be planted by a stream, it means that its seed must necessarily be carried by that stream. And the seed itself has no say for where the stream of water is to bring it to its final destination. So now that in other words, this blessed man, this soon-to-be tree, in his seedling form, goes with the flow, to use a sort of a colloquial phrase. That is, he is one with that which carries him, and wherever he is planted, given that he delights in the law of the Lord, he yields fruit in its season, and his leaf does not wither, regardless of where he is planted. And all that he does, he prospers. So this follows from the previous passage, this follows logically. He prospers because he follows the law that mediates between the day and night. He prospers because he does not resist where the stream may plant his seed, and he grows and he prospers where he is planted. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. So what might this mean? Well, if the wicked are to be like chaff that the wind drives away, we have to understand what chaff is. And chaff is this covering, this outer covering, this layer around the seed of a grain. And so if we imagine this covering, this in some sense protective layer, this substance that is indigestible by human beings, if this chaff is driven away by the wind, and this is to be the analogy of the wicked, what can we deduce from this? The wicked, those that do not delight in the differentiation between right and wrong, between the light and the darkness. One reason could be that when the wind blows away the chaff, the seed is left unprotected, and it is open to all kinds of insult. However, the wicked are the chaff in this example, and so they are seen as this layer that covers the seed, that covers the thing that is to provide growth, the thing that allows the grain to be either be replanted for further growth or consumed to raise the body of man. And so the wicked are this indigestible covering of the pure body that is of something that is actually useful. And perhaps the view of the chaff is that it is not useful, and that it is a hindrance. It is something that must be removed before the seed can be consumed or to be replanted for some greater purpose, as something that stands in the way. These are the wicked. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. And we could say that judgment is something of the wind. It is something that tests. It is something that points out failure. It is something that points to the truth, or that is committed to the truth. And if you have the wicked that are like the chaff, that are the covering of the principle or of the meaningful bit, then they are but just a shell, a casing, and of course they cannot stand up to the wind of judgment. They cannot stand up to true purpose and meaning. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. So to continue, chapter 2, the reign of the Lord's anointed. Why do the nations rage, and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, quote, "Let us burst their bonds apart, and cast away their cords from us." End quote. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath, and terrify them in his fury, saying, quote, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill." End quote. "I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, quote, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." End quote. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. For his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So let's dissect this. Why do nations rage, and the peoples plot in vain? So a nation, a body of men, brought together by some common cause. Why do they rage? Why do they succumb to the disorder, the disunity? Why do they fight other nations? Why do they rage, and the peoples plot in vain? Why do they establish a land for themselves? Why do they work the land, labor their life away, if, in the end, this emergent nation is just going to succumb to some collective pathology and submit to the base emotions of rage? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together. Against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, "Let us burst their bonds apart, and cast away their cords from us." So in other words, these kings, they become these parasites, pathological entities that latch onto the plot of the people. And so they come together in a council against the Lord, against the divine judge, and against his appointed people. They say, "Let us burst their bonds apart." The very uniting principle they feel is something to cast aside, to cast away their cords from us, to separate themselves from the rest of humanity, to elevate themselves above the plot of man, above the very desire to unite. And these of course are the wicked, those that take advantage, those that wish disunity, or to have somebody else labor for their own well-being without contributing anything to the collective, without strengthening that bond. They'd rather use these bonds to shackle rather than to proliferate happiness and the well-being of people. He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision. Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, "As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. And so those that are in the divine place, this union between heaven and earth, they laugh at this condition at which the rulers and the kings bring about for themselves and their people. The Lord holds them in derision, and he speaks to them in his wrath. And so what might it mean for the Lord to say that he has set his king on Zion, his holy hill? Now, if it is indeed the case that King David is writing this, then I think we should take it with a grain of salt. But it would be a strange thing for the Lord God to have a king of his own. For the King of Kings cannot have a king over himself. That just wouldn't make any sense. We also know it to be the case that the Lord does not prefer a king to be over man. So, in this language, perhaps we must interpret this differently. And a king, instead of being the one that is the parasite, is the pathology of human civilization, and if it is the case that those who are at peace and in harmony with heaven and earth laugh at this condition, when they say, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill, the place of Zion is heaven. This is the ultimate union between heaven and earth, the principle of emanation and the principle of emergence. They meet together. And here, at this place, the king is set over. And in this sense, the king must be a uniting force to hold heaven and earth together. Now, I have some reservations about this statement, about the king that's over Zion. But I don't think it's necessary to be too particular in this case, at least yet. He says, or rather, it continues, I will tell of the decree. The Lord said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possessions. So in other words, we are the creatures that have come from the divine authority. We have this ability to perceive the divine that is unparalleled to anything on this earth. And since we are born of that source, it is our responsibility to follow the way of that source so that we may accept our heritage, which includes the nations of the earth and all of its ends. And he says, you shall break them with a rod of iron. And so who, in this case, is them? It's likely that he's referring to the parasites in whatever form they may take, whether it be some ruler, a king. He could be talking about other nations, if this is indeed King David that he is speaking to, that the Lord is speaking to. Now therefore, O kings, be wise, be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. And so this son, this offspring, it can be a foreshadowing of Christ. It can also be, as we've discussed in many cases, a Russian doll type scenario that scales at different levels, where the Son is to be found in the mind of man, the way to the divine, the on-ramp to the kingdom of heaven, or to heaven itself. And there's an instruction here to the kings of the earth to be wise and to follow in the ways of the Lord. I find this particularly interesting because regardless of the institution of government, whether it's highly centralized, as in the case of the ancient days here, perhaps in the times of King David, or in more modern circumstances, or other open and relatively free societies of the ancient world, this commonality of following a common purpose, and the highest purpose, is explicit for a proper functioning, for the longevity, for the sustainability of a society and a collective that binds itself together, so that, in the case of kings, they do not succumb to this way of bursting bonds, of disunity, of casting away their cords, of abject tyranny and submission of the people that they rule over. But rather, if the king is to follow the Lord, the king is a guide rather than a tyrant. Now, in our modern day, we have done away with the idea of the kingship in many countries, but the principle remains the same, that if there is to be a bond among men, that this bond must be elevated to the highest, so that we can bring down the divine principle, and so that our union may be strong enough to hold it. Because if it is not, it will break apart. And when it breaks apart, there is no shortage of the wicked that will step in to fill that void and to try to connect the pieces for their own purposes. So let's continue here with chapter 3. Save me, O my God. So this is a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. Selah. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Selah. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people. who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you strike all the enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Selah. Now, before we get into this, I believe that this word, Selah, S-E-L-A-H, is a sort of a musical pause. This is meant to be sort of a hymn or a song. So he says, talking to the Lord, again, this is David, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. And he remains faithful. He says, but you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. I lay down and slept. I awoke again, and the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. So it's interesting here, he places his confidence, he places his livelihood, he has faith in the Lord. And why does he do that? Why does he do this? Because he believes that it is right. He believes that it will lead him to a place of salvation, this place of heaven, and this peace of soul and peace of mind. And he asks, arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. And so, of this psalm, there's not too much to say. It is not particularly deep. Rather than we see an insight into David's commitment and into his faith. Chapter 4. Answer me when I call. This is to the choir master with stringed instruments, a psalm of David. Answer me when I call, O Lord, of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. Be angry and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts on your own beds and be silent. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your faces upon us, O Lord. You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord. Make me dwell in safety. And so, what I gather from many of these psalms, of course not all, but certainly in this one and the one prior that are most fresh on the top of our conscious minds, they are not a direct uncovering of what God is, but rather a gradual searching of what we know to be there, but isn't readily visible to our naked senses. almost like a rogue planet out in the universe that's not illuminated by any light. We know it to be there, we can feel it, perhaps we can measure it, but we cannot see it. Or in another sense, just as we are searching around in a room that is dark, we can get a sense for what's in it. Absent our sight, we can feel our way around it. We can discover its dimensions by feeling its walls. We could discover its contents by what we feel within it. And we could discover a picture, a clearer idea of this divine nature, of this reality. And of course, the divine nature is much like this, wandering without sight in a dark room, trying to figure out what exactly is in it. And it is often the case that we don't explicitly know exactly what is in it, but slowly we begin to gather evidence that explains to us what it is. And so in this chapter 4 here, again, there's not too much information that is all that useful for a human being that is perhaps struggling or in pursuit of the truth. But there is some useful information. All evidence is evidence after all. And so we see here a prayer from David. He says, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness." This is a plead to the source of morality, of rightness and wrongness. And what David is saying here is, answer me when I call of my righteousness. Let me know if I am right or if I'm wrong, so that I may adjust my path accordingly, because my faith is in you, and if I am wrong, I will adjust accordingly. You have given me relief when I was in distress. In other words, when I have found your way, when I found your path, it has put me at ease, has given me relief. So in other words, as we feel around in this dark room, this large, dark room, we know that when we have found something, we are given relief by it. Our distress is abated. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer. And then he appeals to men and he says, "How long shall my honor be turned into shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies?" And this comes from somebody in a position of leadership. How long will you love in vain? How long will you love in vain words and seek after lies? So how long will these people stumble through their own dark caves, their own dark rooms, without wanting to discover exactly what is in it, but rather just stumble around blindly? This doesn't make any sense. If you find yourself in a condition with a conscious mind to perceive, you would think that you would want to know your surroundings, you would want to know where you can lay your head to rest. You would want to know the objects that surround you, although they may be lofty and difficult to understand. And perhaps this very loftiness and difficulty in understanding is the very reason why many turn away and they love vain words and seek after lies. But know that the Lord has set apart the godly for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. In other words, when you call for truth, when you are after it, when you pursue it, truth itself will call back to you, because your mind is open now to receive it. be angry, and do not sin. Ponder in your own hearts, on your own beds, and be silent. And so it's interesting, this statement, be angry and do not sin. Another way to interpret that is be agitated and do not sin. For I think in the absence of sin, there is a natural agitation. There is something that calls to us, an easy liberator from our suffering, the quiet drone and nag of existential questions that although may not at one time be explicit in our minds, are always there, humming on. And he says, ponder in your own hearts, on your beds, and be silent. There is this humility in solemn fortitude that can be expressed in this way, pondering in your own hearts, on your own beds, in silence, what plagues us in the absence of sin, faced with the true nature of things, the difficult questions. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. Now this is, on the surface, fairly self-explanatory, but again, it begs the question, what are the right sacrifices? And although we may be just entering this dark room for which we are stumbling about, gathering evidence, gathering information, and we have made a distinction between those that wish to know and wish to understand and those that do not. And by offering the right sacrifices, we accept that although there are a great many things within the darkened room that are seemingly beyond our comprehension, we still must sacrifice in order to be able to better understand them. And it's within this understanding, I think, that we are more able to accept divine wisdom. There are many who say, "Who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord." You have put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. So an interesting distinction here of an abstract principle, a divine principle perhaps, a immaterial being, improving the condition of man more so than the material comforts, that is the abundance of grain and wine. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. So in other words, this knowing, this commitment and this faith to understanding and of walking the path of righteousness, to find the things in this room that will sustain us, although we may not be able to readily see it or to perceive it. It is within this commitment that we may lie down in peace and sleep, because the Almighty allows us to dwell in safety. Chapter 5. Lead me to your righteousness. To the choir master for the flutes, a psalm of David. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. For to you do I pray. O Lord, in the morning you hear my voice. In the morning I prepare a sacrifice for you and watch. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down toward your holy temple in fear of you. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me, for there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled against you. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy, and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exalt you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor, as with a shield. So again, we are at the beginning of this painting. We are establishing a base color upon which we can illuminate the scene that the world shows us. And so we have here another plead. Give ear to my words, O Lord, consider my groaning. My groaning from this place of discomfort, from this wanting or this longing. Give attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for do I pray. And so to give attention is the real key here. Because if truth and all that is, period, all that is love, if it is to give attention to the sound of a cry, to attend to its source, the truth of that will make one understand what makes one cry. And within this attention, within this hope and faith for a resolution, the prayer can be answered. And then in verse 3 here, we see a ritual in the morning in which a sacrifice is prepared, and further attention is given. This time, not a request for attention from the divine, but rather attention given to the divine from man, from the individual that is doing the sacrificing, which is in itself an exercise of that attention. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. Because again, the divine nature is this perpetually uplifting spirit. Pride, this extreme self-satisfaction at one's accomplishments, can never serve as any foundation, because it is a weak foundation. Eventually, the fuel that provides for the pride of man runs out, and the engine for which required that fuel no longer accepts it. And in such cases, pride is broken and humility is required. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But I, through the abundance of your steadfast love, will enter your house. I will bow down towards your holy temple in fear of you. And so, if we are to wind this back to when he says, you destroy those who speak lies, the Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. And so if we have something that, if we consider what destruction is, we might say that it is of something that is so far gone, so in a state of disrepair, that it cannot be reconstituted. It cannot be reunited in the whole in the same way. And it's not necessarily that the man himself will perish, although if the deceit and the bloodthirstiness is far enough away from the divine and from the source of goodness, of course it will lead to death. But there are any number of intermediate circumstances in which what dies and what perishes in that sense is the self that leads to these types of behaviors, that leads to the deceit and bloodthirstiness. And that occurs through the divine grace, that it comes back to the right way. Of course one doesn't all of a sudden return to this rapidly ascending beam of light. It is a gradual process, a path through the wilderness that one must walk, albeit a paved path, thankfully, for our many, many years of asking the questions of why and what for. We have found it in our stumblings in this dark room, of trying to determine exactly what is in it, why it is here, and why we have found ourselves within it. And so we see David here. Although many of us may take this for granted, he recognizes that he stands in the steadfast love. He recognizes that he has made the decision to pursue that rapid ascension of light, to walk towards it from where he stands. And he says, I will bow down toward your holy temple in the fear of you. And as I reflect on this statement, in the fear of you, I remember hearing this as a child and not understanding this. In fact, I felt disappointed when I heard this as a child. I felt if I am to submit to this thing, how can it be in fear? Why should I be fearful of something that it supposedly loves me with all the love that is possible? And I think rather this is a state of man, not necessarily a design of God. And I would say that this fear comes from our relationship to it, the absolute vastness of it, and the recognition of our ignorance and our fallen nature compared to it. And it is this that makes us fearful. And not only are we fearful of this, but also we are fearful when we look away from it, because all we see is the abyss. All we see is a new, unexplored environment that is pitch black, that is full of pitfalls and traps and death and suffering. And so no wonder this produces fear in man. Lead me, O Lord, in your righteousness, because of my enemies. Make your way straight before me. And perhaps this is not the best justification for asking the Lord to lead in his righteousness because of one's enemies. But this is another step in the right direction, because we recognize that this righteousness, the right side of the track, the brighter side of life, is what we pursue. And so what we would want is for the divine to give this to us, or at least to reveal this, allow us to be able to perceive it, so that we may walk it. We may walk that path. And he says, make your way straight before me, rather than this crooked, winding path that goes in all sorts of different directions, that is subject to all sorts of torments and tyrannies. Make it straight, so that I may walk upright into the divine glory. For there is no truth in their mouth. Their inmost self is destruction. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongue. So what can we make of this? So truth, this rightness, this way of being, this divine grace, this love, does not exist in the mouths of these people. And because of this, their inmost self, thing, the object that requires some peace of mind and stability, is nothing but destruction, is nothing but disunity, nothing but misplaced goods. Their throat is an open grave. That is, anything that might come from their mouths entices one into their own demise, into the blackness of the room, of our proverbial room that we have been talking about, for which when we first entered it we had no idea where we were, what surrounds us, why we were in here, and why we were confined to this space. And as we have progressed through the ages, we have enlightened little corners of it, so that we may inhabit it and be successful. But it is within these wicked people, those that have no truth in their mouth, those that their innermost self is nothing but destruction, those that their throat is an open grave, those that darken the corners of our room that we have found solace in, that we understand, that we can place our feet firmly upon, so that we may progress into a new direction, into new uncharted territories, and for greater and higher heights. Make them bear their guilt, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Because of the abundance of their transgressions, cast them out, for they have rebelled against you. And it's within this rebellion that blinds the eyes of men, that corrupts their reason, and that pollutes their heart, where all of these things are required to pursue the righteous path. For those who wish to corrupt it must be expelled from society. They must be cast out. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them ever sing for joy and spread your protection over them, that those who love your name may exalt you. For you bless the righteous, O Lord. You cover him with favor as a shield. And so this concludes the first episode of the Psalms here, the first 5 chapters. So in a sense, interesting here. We're beginning to see the appeals to the divine. We're beginning to paint a picture in which the divine image will emerge to us. In the beginning, certainly it must be so necessarily simple. And as I've said earlier, that much of this could be taken for granted. But this is the basis upon which we begin our long journey into the unknown. And so we have to have faith for this reason. And so I will stop here to continue next with chapter 6, titled, O Lord, Deliver My Life.